Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the next installments of our webinar series. For those of you who are not familiar with Franczek PC, we are a law firm of approximately 30 attorneys who focus on labor and employment and educational law. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items to address. First, right under the presentation slides, you'll have the ability to type and submit questions. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the program by using this feature. Everyone logged into today's program will receive an email that includes a link to the recording of the webinar as well as the presentation. Now let's go ahead and get started. My name is Melissa Sobota, and I'm one of your hosts. I'm a partner at Franczek PC, and I focus my practice primarily on labor and employment matters.
Hi, and my name is Erin Walsh. I am an associate at Franczek, and I do both labor and employment and school law.
Okay, so as we know, with the new Pritzker administration, there's been a significant change in leadership in Illinois, and so we have a few initial comments that we'd like to make regarding this.
Melissa, where do you think the new administration is going to have the biggest impact, and why?
I believe that the new Pritzker administration will have the greatest impact in areas of labor, employment, and education because he focused on those issues in his campaign. Specifically, the governor ran on a pro-labor platform in an effort to distinguish himself from the prior Rauner administration, which was seen as very anti-union. Additionally, Governor Pritzker ran on a platform of adequate public school funding and has appointed almost an entirely new state board of education. Two of those appointments are educators with experience in early childhood education and students with disabilities. Those are both areas of focus that Pritzker and other state legislatures have focused on. So Erin, are there any other state agencies that you believe will be impacted by the new governor?
I do. So the governor has made a number of key appointments to a few state agencies and Illinois boards that will help implement and enforce the new laws and regulations of his administration. For example, the governor has replaced the director of the Illinois Department of Labor, which is an agency that primarily is tasked with auditing and enforcing the new amendments to the Illinois minimum wage law and enforcing the increased penalties for employers who violate the minimum wage law. And I'll be talking a little bit more in detail about what that law is later on in this presentation. Also, he appointed a new director of the Illinois Department of Human Rights. This individual was the former Midwest Regional Director of Lambda Legal, which is an organization focused on LGBTQ rights. So this appointment may result in a new renewed focus by the Illinois Department of Human Rights on LGBTQ rights just in general. From the education side, Governor Pritzker also appointed an almost entirely new state board of education, swapping out all but one of 9 members who had been appointed by former Governor Rauner. So among these appointments, two educators with experience in early childhood education and students with disabilities were appointed, and those are 2 areas of focus during his campaign. So these newly appointed school board members will be pivotal when confronting issues faced with Illinois schools, such as teacher shortages, funding shortfalls, and compliance with the Every Student Succeeds Act.
So I believe that another big area that the Rauner administration will have an impact on is with the unions. As I mentioned previously, he ran on a very pro-union agenda, and we've seen some significant changes right from the beginning with the administration. So Governor Rauner, just by way of background in case anyone is not familiar with this, he was the original plaintiff in the landmark Supreme Court case of Janus versus AFSCME, which found that compelling public sector employees to pay fair share fees was unconstitutional. And obviously that has been a big deal for a lot of unions. It also one of the many drivers that we've seen of the unions trying to exercise some additional political muscle and pushing for a lot of the strikes that we're seeing around here lately to try and show their worth to their members. So Governor Rauner unilaterally also stopped paying step increases to state employees represented by AFSCME and defied a court order requiring the administration to pay back pay to affected employees. So Governor Pritzker, on the other hand, on his first day in office, announced his intent to restore the salary steps for employees whose steps were frozen since 2015. He has since given most, if not all, affected employees their back pay and negotiated a successor agreement with AFSCME that raises employee base salaries for 4 years starting January 1, 2020 by 1.5%, then another 2.1% in July, and then another 3.95% each July thereafter. Governor Pritzker has also issued an executive order on his first day in office requiring all state agencies to consider on a case-by-case basis whether a project labor agreement should be used for all public works projects. And for anybody that's not familiar with a project labor agreement, that's a form of a pre-hire collective bargaining agreement covering all the terms and conditions of employment on a specific project. Thus, the executive order has the potential to award millions of dollars of public construction projects at the state and local level to union-only workers. Governor Pritzker also signed into law the Collective Bargaining Freedom Act, which prohibits the local units of government from establishing right-to-work zones. These so-called right-to-work zones prohibited union security agreements or fair share agreements between private companies and labor unions and were quite controversial. There was also a previous court ruling that found that local government entities did not have the authority to do that. So the law basically codified the court's ruling. So turning to Pritzker's impact on employment.
Great. So I'm going to cover this topic. Throughout his campaign, Governor Pritzker promised to put state government on the side of working families. And very early on, he demonstrated his intent to fulfill this process by signing into law 2 executive orders on his very first day of office. The first focused on government transparency. The second authorized the Illinois Department of Labor to review pending cases under wage laws, including the Wage Payment Collection Act and the Minimum Wage Law, and to refer those cases of wage theft and worker exploitation to the Illinois Attorney General for civil prosecution. It further ordered the Department of Central Management Services and the Department of Human Rights to review the state's pay plan in an effort to mitigate gender bias by ensuring that prospective female state workers can't be asked about their salary history. You'll see this is a focus that he continuously did throughout the legislative process, throughout the first legislative term. So other major legislative items that came out of his first term in office include amending the Prevailing Wage Act by establishing locally acceptable prevailing wage rates and developing reports on diversity of workers employed by public work projects. Again, this was a law that was signed on his first day of office to show his intent to really put his best foot forward in making sure that Illinois state workers are going to be noticed and change is going to be made. Notably, this was legislation that had been vetoed by the former Governor Rauner. The second major new legislative change involved increasing the minimum wage law. So I'm sure you've heard that this new amendment incrementally raises the statewide minimum wage of $8.25 per hour to $15 per hour by the year 2025. Again, it's worth noting that a similar measure had been vetoed by former Governor Rauner in 2017. Now, in addition to this wage increase, the new law increases the statutory penalty to 5% per month. Originally, it was 2%. It also creates a new provision allowing employees to recover treble amounts of the wages owed. So an unfortunate consequence of this amendment will likely be that employees and plaintiffs' lawyers will be more emboldened to pursue claims for even more modest underpayments. And it may be more difficult and sadly more expensive for employers to settle minimum wage and overtime claims just because these statutory penalties are going to provide such an additional cost and benefit for the employees and the plaintiff's attorneys. The law also enhances penalties on the employer by adding an additional penalty of $1,500 beyond the current penalty of 20% of the amount of underpayment for willful, repeated, or reckless conduct, as well as a $100 penalty for each impacted employee attributed to the employers who fail to maintain records required by the minimum wage laws. So it's definitely worth reviewing this law and reaching out to your attorneys when there is a possible overtime claim at issue, just to try to mitigate and minimize the statutory damages that could be imposed with this new amendment. A second major change in the employment setting that occurred this past legislative session that was signed into law by Governor Pritzker was amending the Equal Pay Act by expanding coverage to include pay equity between African American employees and non-African American employees. This law also bans employers from asking job applicants for information about their wage, salary, or benefit history, and requires employees to or requiring an employee to sign a contract or a waiver that would prohibit the employees from disclosing or discussing information about their wage, salary, benefits, or other compensation. Now, this law went into effect in September of this year. The Governor Pritzker also signed into law a change to the Illinois Wage Payment and Collection Act, and this essentially is requiring employers to reimburse employees for all necessary expenditures or losses incurred by employees, including data for cell phones or travel expenses. So this would be considered included within the Illinois Wage Payment and Collection Act and would be a form of compensation that employees are entitled to receive. Now, again, with a new director for the Illinois Department of Labor, there may be an increased focus on the Wage Payment and Collection Act and specifically this new amendment and the enforcement, how they're going to go about in enforcing this and looking at claims. And finally, and probably the most interesting maybe, is the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which legalizes the recreational use of cannabis. Now, we are going to be conducting a webinar on the impact of this new law for our November webinar, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But the important items to remember is that under this new law, employers are still able to maintain a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to the consumption, storage, or use of cannabis in the workplace and while on duty. With that said, the Act amends the Illinois Right to Privacy in the Workplace Act, which prohibits employers from taking any sort of adverse employment action or disciplinary action against employees for using lawful products off the employer's premises during non-working hours. So what the law does is that it includes cannabis and or marijuana as a lawful product under state law. So the million-dollar question is going to be how to effectively test for cannabis, since none of the current tests detect whether an employee is currently impaired by cannabis use. The significance of this issue is even more apparent given that the new law adds a due process element, which requires employers to afford the employee a reasonable opportunity to contest the basis of the determination. So at this point, we're really recommending that managers and or supervisors are trained on to how to identify signs of impairment and how to document their observations, as this is going to be a really critical component for employers who will have the burden to prove that the employee is impaired by cannabis while at work. So again, this is just a sampling of the major legislation that is impacted on the employment side, but the focus is really that Governor Pritzker made it apparent and made it kind of a priority to expand the employees or the workers' rights by amending these legislations, these statutes that provide protections for them.
Turning to education.
Turning to the education side, during his campaign, Governor Pritzker emphasized his hope to improve the public education system and to make Illinois a national model for education. Now, this message was very, very different from former Governor Ronner, who was a vocal proponent of school choice and supported efforts to expand the charter school options in the state. Now, in terms of public policy and initiatives, Governor Pritzker formed and appointed members to a newly created Educational Success Committee, which consists of 35 members whose involvement in education range from public school administrators to university presidents and current and retired educators. Now, the stated priorities of this committee are to align the educational and funding priorities across state agencies and systems, ensuring equitable and adequate funding, strengthening the pipeline of teachers and child-serving professionals, and ensuring education meets the needs of all learners. Now, in June of this year, Governor Pritzker signed into law a $40 billion budget package, which raised the funding for elementary and high schools by nearly $379 million. Now, this exceeded last year's required increase in the EBF by approximately $29 million. So, state funding will continue to be a key component to the success of Governor Pritzker's initiatives, including fixing the underfunded pension and funding the EBF formula. This obviously is an effort to show that he is committed to education in the state, to public education in the state. Now, he also signaled his desire to prioritize funding to the EBF formula when he appointed Senator Andy Manor as co-chair to the Educational Success Committee. Now, for those who are not aware, the senator was really known as a driving force behind the successful movement to reform Illinois' school funding formula. So again, just another signal that this is going to be a priority for his tenure as governor. Noteworthy legislative changes that occurred on the education side included increasing the minimum wage for teachers to $40,000 by 2023-2024. Now, this effort had been vetoed by Governor Rauner in the past. In July of this year, Governor Pritzker also signaled into law Public Act 101-0046, which amends the school code to require an educational support service employee who is subject to a RIF to be hired, and that is hired back within 1 year to maintain the same rights that individual had accrued during his previous services with the school district. This bill was an initiative by the Illinois Federation of Teachers and had passed both chambers during the 2016 legislative session, but again had been vetoed by former Governor Rauner. Now, if you haven't noticed, there is a pattern between the difference between former Governor Rauner's priorities and Governor Pritzker's, as many of the changes had been previously vetoed by former Governor Rauner. Finally, the last point I'm going to touch upon today is in August of 2019 of this year, Governor Pritzker signaled into law Public Act 101-0591, which amends the school code to require school districts to develop and implement an appeals process for teachers who receive an unsatisfactory rating under para. Now, under this new law, districts must determine the criteria for successful appeals. If an appeal is successful, the issuance of a rating to replace the unsatisfactory rating must be determined through bargaining between the exclusive bargaining representative and the school district. Now, notably, the Act does not require retroactive application of the appeals process to ratings issued prior to its effective date, and the law will go into effect at the beginning of the 2020-2021 school year. Now, at this time, with regard to this new law, we recommend that districts begin working with their teachers' unions to develop the required appeals process and with its joint committees to determine which qualified evaluators will serve on the appeal panel and the criteria that will be used for successful appeals. And so with that, that's pretty much a brief overview of some of the major impacts that legislative impacts on both the employment side and the education side.
Thank you. Excuse me. Well, now we're going to talk a little bit about pensions and Pritzker's impact on that. Obviously, we all know that the Pritzker administration inherited a massive pension crisis that has been growing for decades throughout Illinois. Illinois pension funds are hundreds of billions of dollars underfunded, and in February, Governor Pritzker announced the establishment of two task forces. One, to consider possible consolidation of some pension funds, and the other to consider whether to sell some state-owned assets to pay the funds. The Pritzker administration is still considering possible consolidation possibilities for smaller municipalities and has allowed some smaller police and firefighter pension funds to pool their money to make investments that could better returns and ease the burden on their taxpayers. This consolidation of investment funds is not a full consolidation of the underfunded pensions themselves because it does not consolidate their other functions or liabilities. It's just a consolidation of the funding itself. So there's also recently been reporting that in July, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, her administration sought to consolidate the city pension money with smaller downstate and suburban pension funds in a new statewide system. Mayor Lightfoot's request was seen as controversial and received pushback by several municipalities and legislatures because there was concern that such a consolidation would be unfair to the municipalities whose pension funds were not as badly underfunded as the City of Chicago's pensions. I think that there's no secret that the City of Chicago's pension funds are also extremely underfunded, just like the state pension funds themselves. So there was definitely some controversy over Mayor Lightfoot's request, and some considered her request to be a state takeover of the city's cash-short pension funds, and a request the Pritzker administration has since rejected. Pension consolidation has been considered several times over the last several decades, but it's ultimately been rejected due to pushback from local officials who prefer to control their own pension situations. So we'll see what the sort of consolidation that they're doing with some of the smaller police and fire pensions, how that works, and whether, if it's successful, whether there's other municipalities that may become interested in such an agreement or arrangement. Additionally, state asset sales have also been considered and rejected over the years in light of what has been seen as a really bad deal with the sell-off of the city's parking meters. So the consideration to sell the Thompson Center or some other major state assets has been considered and subsequently rejected a number of times. In Governor Pritzker's first budget address, he pledged an additional $200 million in revenue for pensions, but the pledge was contingent on amending the Illinois Constitution to allow for a graduated income tax, a process that will take more than 2 years and requires support from 3/5 of the General Assembly and approval by the Illinois taxpayers during the 2020 election. This graduated income tax has been criticized by a number of individuals and organizations, and it's currently remains to be seen how likely it is that it will be successful on the 2020 ballot. There will be a large push on both sides and a lot of money spent in advertising on both sides to try and see what happens with that ballot measure. Finally, in Governor Pritzker's budget that was signed into law, he removed the TRS 3% excess salary cap for teachers. Now, or all educational employers, I should say, educational employees. Educational employers will again be responsible for the excess salary payments to TRS only if they provide a TRS member with year-over-year increases of more than 6% in any of the years used to calculate the member's pension. So there's probably some collective bargaining implications of this. I know that there were a number of agreements or negotiations that occurred that under the 3% system when that was in effect for a brief period of time, and it was made negotiations very contentious at some times. So that being said, we are now open for questions. There's a little box down in the corner of your screen. If you have any questions, you can feel free to write them there, and we will read them and answer them.
I also do want to note that veto session starts this coming week. So anything that had passed both houses or both chambers and is yet to be signed, there may be developments on that front. I've also been told that they're doing a cannabis cleanup bill, which is really not going to affect anything from the employment side or the school law side, but it'll just provide a little bit more detail into the implementation just generally. So I know that's going to be a hot topic during the veto session. But just so you're aware, it's going to be, I believe the first day is on Monday. It's going to go through Wednesday and then follow suit the next week after that. So there's usually developments that occur on the legislative side during that session.
And as a follow-up question, I guess, to the marijuana bill cleanup, I heard something that may push the implementation back from January 1 to July. Is that accurate?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. It's possible. I know that they had been working on the cleanup bill during the legislative session, but they wanted to get all their stakeholders to sign off on it before submitting it for the veto session or just reopening it up during the veto session. But it is definitely something to keep your eye on because we want to make sure that the implementation is going to be as smooth as possible.
Any questions? Okay. Well, we just want to remind you of our save the date. Our next upcoming webinar is on the marijuana legalization. It's going to be on November 12th at 11 a.m. And in that webinar, you'll get more details on the implication of the marijuana legalization. You'll receive an email today with a link to this program's recording and presentation, as well as a link to register for our upcoming webinars. And, oh, wait, we have a question. We are hearing about possible property tax freeze legislation and or required fund balance spend down legislation being a part of the spring session as carrots or incentives for the progressive income tax question. You know what? That's a very good question. Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with what has been whether that's been added into the veto session, but I'm happy to look into it and follow up with you. If you want to email me that question, email Erin or I that question, we can certainly look into it and get back to you with an answer. I apologize. I have not heard that specifically just yet. Any other questions? I think our email addresses are on the first slide. Oh, they're not, but yeah, my email is mds@franczek.com, and Erin's is
ekw@franczek.com. I believe they're also on the website.
Yes. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for listening to us, and I hope it was an informative session.
Thank you. Please stand by.